My name is Mildred Jackson Sadler. I was born August the 29th, 1924. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hello from Point of Rock Studios. On behalf of 90 over 90, I'm Rob Sumner. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Mildred Jackson Sadler. Miss Sadler was born on August 29th, 1924, on a farm in York County, South Carolina. After spending her early years on the farm, she moved to Gastonia and graduated from Shaw University with a degree and spent a long and distinguished career in education. She is retired assistant superintendent from Gaston County Schools. She was married to the late Edward DeWitt Sadler for over 47 years, and together they raised 5 children: Brenda, Edward, Kenneth, John, and James. She's the proud grandmother of 14, great-grandmother of 10, and great-great-grandmother of 2. Mrs. Sadler, welcome to 90 over 90. Thank you for being here. Are you have probably not been interviewed before, have you?
Not personal.
Okay.
It was always business.
Right. Well,
not personal.
we may talk a little bit about business. We'll probably talk mainly about your life and some things that you want to talk about. I mentioned in the introduction that you grew up on a farm, and the first question that comes to mind for me is what kind of farm and what do you recall about your early years on the family farm?
I grew up on a farm in Clover, South Carolina. It was about 1 mile from the town limits of Clover. The main product that was raised was cotton. I lived in a home with my grandparents, my father's parents, and my father and mother, and 6 siblings. Aside from raising cotton, growing cotton, and the farm land was owned, on which I lived, was owned by my grandfather. The house that we lived in was built in 1916.
Tell me.
It was not a sharecropper's house. It was painted and had green shutters. We were not sharecroppers.
Did you feel like that you were a lucky young girl living in a house with all that family, and or was it something?
I did. Yes, I felt loved and protected, and my dad was an only child, so we got all of it. Although there were 7 of us, we were spread out, so there weren't 7 of us to begin with.
Right.
I'm the second of 7 children. So, and there were 3 girls born before the first boy was born, and we didn't have to do a heavy menial labor on the farm. My grandfather and my dad did the majority of the heavy work. They owned their own livestock or mules, and they rented extra land to grow cotton from white landowners who were not working the land themselves. They rented from the land from them, and because my dad and granddad had livestock and owned their own land on which we lived, the people, white store owners, trusted them to be able to buy or purchase their own fertilizer and things that they needed to grow the crops of the cotton. But they had to pay the landowners from whom they rented the land the first bales of cotton.
So they got the cotton for the privilege of allowing your father and your grandfather to work the land.
That's true.
Was it unusual for an African American family in York County to own 10 acres of land, or was that?
Yes,
it was.
It was.
And also, you describe for me, if you can briefly, kind of what you remember about the farm. You said you had a house. It was the family residence. Did everyone live there?
All of us lived, yes,
Uh-huh.
in this house. And it was painted white and had green shutters, which was unusual. Actually, there were people when they came looking for us would walk or ride around the side of the house looking for where the black people would be living because they didn't think that there were black people living in a house like
That nice.
That nice. And
Did you have barns, I guess?
we had, yes, on the right of the house as you approached it. My grandfather only had a second grade formal education, but he could do lots of different things. He was, like people say, a jack of all trades.
Were you close to him?
Very, very close to him. Yes, I was his second grandchild.
Right.
But we had a brick flower house. My grandmother loved flowers, loved plants. So we had a brick flower house that had windows in it, glass windows. Where her plants and flowers were kept in the wintertime. In the summertime, that was our playhouse. To the left, immediate left of the long front porch of the house, there was a car shed, we called it, but it was enclosed. It was
Kind of
a
like
whole
a
building,
right.
a whole building that had an opening in the front and had two double doors in which the car went into that, and then we had a wood shed immediately beside that where tools and when the wood was chopped and it was put into inside that wood shed, under the wood shed, so that it wouldn't be wet.
Now you said you didn't do a lot of heavy labor, but it seems to me that you must have contributed some on the farm. Tell me about that.
We, in addition to raising cotton, we raised everything that we ate except everything that could be raised on a farm. Potatoes, sweet and white potatoes, tomatoes, okra, all the peas, green beans, all the
Produce garden, basically.
produce. Yeah, that was, yes, but it would be enough so that we would have enough to eat and for my parents to either dry, that you could dry and save, or to can. They would can the vegetables. And we had fruit trees, all kinds of fruit trees, plums, apples, pears, peach trees, damsons, all those that were all around the house. And we had a chicken
Do you miss
house.
any of that? Some of that home?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't miss any of it. Well, I have a brother who lives down there, but no, none of that's there anymore.
Right. Well, let's get back to your early years. Your 7 kids. Where did you attend grade school?
I attended school at a school that was called McKnight High School. It was first grades 1 through 9, and by the time I graduated, it had 11 grades. It was a school that was built on the Rosenwald style, a pattern that the people who owned Sears Roebuck catalog built these houses or gave money, schools for black children. They gave money to counties, I assume, the towns to build these schools for black children.
Mm-hmm.
And
So you attended all
I
11
attended
years
all
there?
11 years in that same schoolhouse.
How did you get to school?
I walked. It was about 3/4 of a mile from.
So it wasn't too far away.
Wasn't too far away. And if it rained really badly, my dad would drive us in the car. We owned a T-model Ford. We had a car from the time I was born. I don't ever remember being in a family that we didn't have a car.
Is that the kind of car that you would crank to start?
You would crank it on the out. Yes, of course it was on the outside.
Right.
Go out to the front of the radiator, and you'd have to hand crank it. turn it, and they put the key, in, of course, in the switch, and
Hope it would start.
hope it would start. And then the radiator, I don't know how often Dad drained the water from the radiator, but you had to drain it to keep it from freezing. So I guess in the summertime the water stayed in it. I didn't pay much attention to all those things.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you'd just been at church, and I guess tell me, was the church a big part of your family life, and tell me a little bit about that. Describe that for me.
The church was an integral part of my life. I remember from earliest point in the house where we grew up. Of course, that house burned later, but I remember seeing on the wall picture frames covered with glass that had cradle roll certificates in it, showing when I was christened or baptized in the church, what we call sprinkling.
Mm-hmm.
Where
I'm a Methodist, so we sprinkle
you know
too.
about that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I am too. But that's what we did to dedicate a child to the Lord at an early age. So that was done, I guess, when I was 6 months old. It was called Cradle Roll Certificate. And, of course, I went to Sunday school and grew up with being taught the catechism early in my life. Some of the main questions they ask you: who made you? And where is God? And they say God is everywhere. And of course, a lot of times when I was outside, I would look up and see if I could see him. They said he was everywhere. So I looked for him. I looked to see if he was on a cloud or if I could see him somewhere.
That was probably worth it.
Yeah.
Did you? I think when we spoke earlier, you said that you showed an early aptitude for learning and reading in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and was that recognized by your parents? I'm sure they encouraged the education.
Yes, they read a lot. My earliest, other than from Sunday school, it's to supplement my father's work, money on the farm. My mother took in what was called washing. She washed for some of the wealthy white people in town. We'd go and gather up bring their dirty clothes over. Some of them would bring them to us. If it didn't, we would carry them. My dad would go out of town at the first of the week in the car and bring the clothes home for my mother to wash and iron. And they would give us the newspapers that had accumulated all week. You know, back then you had to boil water and wash the clothes. And they would
Indoors or outdoors?
Outdoors. You drew the water out from the well, and you put it into these big iron pots that my grandfather had put into like a furnace-like place with a chimney. These pots were set in that, and he had cemented rocks together and set these two pots, big iron pots that would hold, I guess, probably 20 gallons or more of water each. And underneath that, we would build a fire under there so the wind wouldn't blow fire sparks everywhere to burn up anything. And that was out of the ordinary because most people set their pots. A three-legged pot would be set up on iron
Tripod,
stuff. Yes,
yeah.
Yes, and it would be set up, and they'd cross the sticks with paper and build a fire in that. But my grandfather built what's called a furnace, and to keep
For
the
safety
sparks.
purposes,
Yes, keep
yeah.
sparks.
So
But
that's where
anyway,
you did the laundry. Your mother did the
that's-
laundry.
Yes, we did out under the trees.
How did she iron it?
Iron with flat irons. We'd make a fire in the fireplace in the house and inside the house, and heat those irons, those flat irons,
Mm-hmm.
at the coals there. Now it was already hot outside and hot inside. No air conditioning. The window, only the good Lord sent the air conditioning He sent when He sent a cool breeze now and then. But back to
Washing your mother
washing, when they would bring the papers, when they picked up the clothes, they would give you these papers to start the fire around the pot. but before, and they would give all the papers to us that they had read during the week, and I would start back on Monday, put the newspapers in order, and read what was in those newspapers before I burned them up, before we would burn them up.
So you got the opportunity to read the newspapers, and then they would go in the fire for your mother's work.
Some of them did, and the softer sheets went to the outdoor toilet for us to use for
Toilet paper.
toilet paper.
Now, did you your plumbing was outdoors, obviously?
Oh, yes.
How about the water?
That
Did you have
was
indoor water?
You know, we had a well outside where we drew water with my grandfather and those who helped him to build. They had these big tiles that were down inside of the well, and up near the top of the well, there were rocks around that, and then they put wood around it for safety. And you had a bucket that was on a chain, a wooden bucket that was on a chain, and you had what was called a windlass. You know, you wind that, put that, there was one end on the bucket, and the other went through a pulley over to this windlass where you would
Pump the water up.
where you would
Fill up your bucket.
where you would put that bucket down into the well.
Oh, I see.
And when it unwound, it would go down into the well, get the water, and then you'd wind it back up. And when you got it wound back up, then you pull it over and then take the water out and put it into whatever vessels you had there. And then we had to do that time after time to get water. That's how we how we got water for ourselves inside, water to take a bath, water to drink, water to wash those clothes, water to feed all the for the animals to drink. Of course, we had cows and pigs and chickens, and and the livestock that my dad knows used too.
You paint a picture of a farm that required a lot of manual labor. Did you want to grow up and be a farmer?
I really didn't think about it because I really didn't know, I guess, how much hard work was. My dad told me I need to learn to do something else because picking cotton, he said I'd pull off every bowl and stand up and I'd see every bird that passed. You know, when you pick cotton, you have to stay down all the time and pick and put.
Did you lose interest in it?
I didn't have any interest in it to begin with. But it was a way of life, and
it's required.
I had to do some of that, but I didn't have to stay out of school to do that. To pick cotton, didn't have to stay out to, you know, what people call it chopping cotton. We call it hoeing cotton. You take a hoe and you'd have to space the cotton plants so they'd have space to grow. You'd have to thin them out, as people say. You have to do that so that the cotton would have space to grow, and so it wouldn't smother itself out. And back to the buildings around the house. In addition to that, where the water was in this well, we had what was called a well house or smokehouse, and in that smokehouse is where my mother and grandmother and those would fill jars with fruit in the summertime and pack it out there in the smokehouse so that we would have food in the wintertime. We'd pick blackberries and all of the other fruits that I was telling you. We had trees around there. They'd either preserve them with sugar or either some peaches and apples and all could be saved with just packing them in jars for us to have during the winter time. And of course my grandfather and dad killed hogs, and we would have
Did you watch that?
The meat, yes.
What kind of experience was that?
Well, you know, it's the law is survival of the fittest, you know, and it didn't bother me to see my daddy kill a hog, because I knew we were going to have some good meat as a result of that. But I remember my oldest son, Ed, when he was staying down there, my grandmother, that's, of course, long
Years
after
later.
I was grown,
Right.
he would go down in the summer, and my grandmother would call a chicken up close to it and feed it, and take had a wire with a hook on it and catch the chicken by the leg, and pull the chicken to her, and get up in her arm when she got the chicken where it was stopped. Then she'd wring the chicken's head off, and Edward wouldn't eat chicken.
He wouldn't. Didn't take his appetite for chicken.
He wouldn't eat chicken. He said he wasn't gonna eat anything somebody killed like that, and gave it to him to eat.
All right. Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You mentioned school. You graduated from the school there,
Valedictorian.
valedictorian. Is that correct?
Valedictorian of my class.
And so you showed an aptitude for learning and an appetite for learning. And you, I mentioned in the introduction that you attended. I didn't mention. You mentioned that you attended. Is it Claflin in
Yes.
Orangeburg? But then
Yeah.
you transferred
To Shaw University.
to Shaw
later.
University and
Yes,
got your
later.
undergraduate degree.
Yes.
And that was a would have been in the late 40s, perhaps,
Yes.
during right after World War II. Is that correct?
Yeah. During World War II, yeah, and following World War II, yeah.
And that, as a result of that, you ended up in Gastonia.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the things you did. Now, you had gotten married to Mr. Sadler, I take it. Is that correct?
Yes, in between, yes.
And y'all were living here in Gastonia as young marrieds, and you.
When he came out of service.
When he came out of the service, he served. Did he serve overseas?
He served in the Southwest Pacific,
He did.
following Pearl Harbor. He was in the Army during Pearl Harbor.
So he was not. Y'all were married, and he was
He-
living elsewhere and in the Army.
He was living elsewhere. I was in school, and he was in the armed forces during that time.
What was your first job in Gastonia?
The very first job that I had after,
You graduated, I guess.
I had taught school in York for a year, and I wasn't employed at first. But anyway, when I did seek work after my third, I had taught school in New York, and after my third child was born.
And let me just say, back in those days, when you got pregnant and were going to have a child, essentially you lost your job.
You lost a teaching job.
Your teaching job. They
teaching
didn't hold
job.
it for you, and
No.
you went and had the baby, and they replaced you, and you didn't get
Yeah.
it back when the baby was born or when you wanted to come back to work.
Yes, unless there was a vacancy.
Right, but I mean, that job was not saved for
That
you.
job was not saved for you as it was in later years when
Right.
you were teaching school. So, and when I sought a job in North Carolina, the first one, I went to employment security because we built this house.
That was on Harrison Street?
On Harrison Street, and it was built under GI Bill of Rights. It's still standing. And it was really a very, very nice house.
You're
I'm
smiling.
very,
You
very
must have
proud
good
of it.
memories.
Yeah, proud of it. And my husband was working for Southern Bell, and of course, in order with 3 children, and to keep the house and everything, it was necessary that I find some work to do. So I went to employment security to ask for a job, and I had a bachelor's degree in home economics and science. And they told me that there was a job at Smith's drugstore uptown, washing dishes at the
lunch counter.
The lunch counter. They're paying $16 a week.
Per week?
$16 a week. Yes, I had done some days work before that. When the first job that gave me told me about it, I did some 2 or 3 days work for a young couple.
Did you take the job at Smith's?
Oh, I took the job at Smith's, yes, and worked there. Worked at Smith's drugstore. after I'd been there washing dishes, and the dishwashing was right out front where everybody, could see you at the lunch counter. I
Was that something hard for you to do, or did you?
No, it wasn't hard to wash dishes. I had the electric machine to do the dishes. It just probably had more effect on how I felt about washing dishes with a bachelor's degree. But you do what you have to do.
Right.
And it wasn't long until the manager found out how much education I had, so they asked me to be the salad maker instead of, and I would take food and go up to, there were two Smith's drugstores on Main Street, and one had a kitchen, so the one that had the kitchen, I'd go there and make the salads, egg salad, ham salad, and I would mix up the hamburger meat and cover it and bring it back down the street on a cart, so that
they could serve it at both locations, I guess.
so they could serve it at that location where we were. And then they found out that I guess that I could do that well.
Now you got a job at the hospital.
Well, following that, they gave me a job on the grill. I became the short order cook in that same facility. Gave me a little bit more money, but
now this was a time, obviously, at the drugstores like in Gastonia, I guess, was no different from any other, certainly southern town, that African Americans could not eat at those counters.
No.
And so,
if they got anything to eat, they'd have to stand there behind the customers who were eating, and ask for a drink to be served, and somebody would bring it around and maybe hand it to you that way. If one of my children wanted to buy a drink, that's what they would have to do. Or any black person, that's what they would have to do to be served there.
And so you later got a job at the
yes,
hospital?
I got a job at Gaston County Negro Hospital as a dietitian, and I worked there for 8 years. It was 8 years, I believe it was. But anyway, during that, while I was working there, the first year or so, I think it was 1956, I had a neighbor who lived across the street who was teaching adult school at Highland High School at night. And she asked me, someone had quit, and she asked me if I wanted to work at night school. She would recommend me to the principal. So she did, and I began teaching adult school 3 nights a week for $5. 3 nights a week we taught, I believe the school was from 6 to 8, 3 nights a week for $5. That supplement my income that I was making at Gaston County Negro Hospital. I worked doing that at night, felt fulfilled teaching again, and then the principal there knew some of my aptitude, and I became the director for the evening adult school. And at the end of, I guess, 8 years or 9 years that I was at the hospital, because I was doing that work and he knew my abilities, someone retired, a teacher was either pregnant or left, and there was a job opening at Highland in the daytime.
That was a Highland High School. That was the African American High School.
African American High School, where I had not been able to get a job because the home economics teacher, once they got a job, if they didn't have any children, and they were doing a good job, they didn't ever leave. So there were no vacancies for me, and I applied for the science job, but the principal felt that men needed to teach science, and they coached and taught science, PE,
right.
And so when this teacher left and was teaching math and science to 8th graders, and I got that job. That's how I got into the system.
Education.
That's how, yes.
And you never looked back after that, did you?
And I got in teaching, and my certificate had to be renewed. When Appalachian State College would send teachers down here to help teachers
Upgrade your certificate.
upgrade your certificate, and that's how I got my certificate renewed, and was able to continue teaching. And
you went back and got your master's. You mentioned earlier
in
you went to Charlotte.
1975, yes, but this was 60. This was 63. The very year that my mother died.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, the house that I was telling you that we all lived and grew up in Clover. My mother was a cancer. Had cancer. She's cancer. Had cancer since she was 48 or 49, and my dad been carrying her back and forth to Charlotte with an old Chevrolet. He carried her back and forth to Charlotte for radiation treatment. So she lived from the time she was 48, and she died when she was 60. And the cancer had gone in remission, but she had a colostomy bag
Mm-hmm.
that she had to use during that time. And because my mother and dad had worked supplementary for a Methodist preacher, his wife, their son was a surgeon. When my mother was first diagnosed with cancer, they did surgery on her in York, and he would do everything that she needed done, that he could do to help her, because of his parents and the love and respect that they had for my mother, caused their son to do all these things for her without pay. So she had very, very good care, and he suggested that if she could get to Charlotte, and my dad had carried her back and forth to Charlotte until she was
No longer.
She lived from when she was 48 and she died at 60, so that was a good long time.
When did you retire from the Gaston County schools?
I retired in 1990, but there was one thing I wanted to tell you about when I was growing up. When I was 5 years old, my grandmother was keeping a white baby. That was another way that my dad and granddaddy supplemented their money, their farm money. Was my grandmother would stay with white ladies when their children were born, and stay with them until the mother was able to get up again.
Mm-hmm.
And she was keeping this child, who called it the super, who was the superintendent really of one of the Clover spinning mill. She had this child in the carriage, and she looked one way and didn't look the other way, and a doctor in Clover was coming. He was looking down somewhere else in his car, struck my grandmother. She had the baby in the carriage. The carriage rolled down the hill and into a light post, and the baby in the carriage didn't get hurt. But my grandmother was cut completely across her chest, and had to put 150 stitches in. They didn't think she'd live, but the doctor wanted to take her. Brought up to Gastonia to Old Garrison General Hospital, and took her down in the basement because no black patients were allowed there because he was a doctor. He had her place there, and it said you could see her heart beating, and her right foot was turned completely around backwards, and they didn't think she was going to live. And the newspaper, my dad was carrying, I saw the article later on, it said, old Negro woman, 50 years old, struck by doctor, named who the doctor was, and didn't expect her to live. She, of course, they brought her up to Garrison General Hospital, and they sewed up, put 150 stitches with some kind of steel thread or something, because she'd always talk about stinging there, and cut off one of her breasts. And but she
survived, yeah.
She
must have been a very tough lady.
and they said she'd never walk again. She walked with me to school at night over these rough, muddy roads where we had no lights. But after you're out in the dark so long, your eyes adjust to the darkness. And she lived. She was 50 years old in 1929 when this happened, and she died in July of 1976 at the age of 97.
Wow.
Oh,
That's quite a story. Well, I know you're very proud of your children. Your oldest, Brenda, was a valedictorian like you and retired from Duke Power.
yes.
Your oldest son, Edward, was superintendent for many years of the Gaston County schools.
Yes, first African American
Yeah, and
of consolidated Gaston County
right.
schools. Yeah.
Kenneth is or was a dentist.
He is.
Is a dentist, still practicing dentistry.
In,
Uh,
yeah.
John is with Freightliner,
Yes.
and James, I believe, is a minister in Charlotte.
Yes, he'd rather be called Elvin.
Oh, Elvin.
James
Okay.
Elvin.
All right.
More
well,
people here, more people would know him as
my
Elvin.
apologies,
But that's
Elvin.
quite all right because I'm glad to say I'm the mother of James and John.
Right. Well, you named them that for a reason. But it's obvious you and Mr. Sadler did a great job of raising your children, teaching them the importance of education, and that's something you should be very proud of. And I think I'm sure they're eternally thankful for all the things that you and their father did for them all through the years, sacrifices you made. And it's been just an absolute pleasure spending some time with you, Miss Sadler. I appreciate your agreeing to do this. And this interview for me has been very educational, but also a lot of fun. And I hope you've had a good time telling a little bit about your life and
Reminiscing.
Yeah, reminiscing.
Yes.
thinking about the old days. And I think that you're a real shining star for a lot of people, folks that know you, and hopefully folks that will see this interview will appreciate a little bit more about what it's like to grow up in the 20s and 30s. And the life you lived, and we appreciate your being here, and we will see you on the internet. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
appreciate it.